Greg Branch is a native and lifelong resident of Saginaw. He is a brand strategist at AM/PM Incorporated in Midland and has 37 years experience in the communication industry as a journalist, public relations practitioner, and advertising copywriter, designer, and creative director. He was elected to Saginaw City Council in 2005 and was re-elected and elected mayor in 2009. Greg and his wife Ann have 3 children and a cantankerous old house. Help me welcome Mayor Greg Branch.
Sylvester, whatever those people in that video took, I want some. As we talked this morning about the state of the city of Saginaw, it helps to, might help to have a shot of Johnny Walker, but more importantly, to think a little about perspective. No matter what we see, looking at it from a different angle, looking at the bigger picture, helps us fully understand something we may have only partly seen. That's why it's good to take a look at the state of Michigan's cities in general. Not to compare ourselves in violent crime statistics, financial health, or elected officials on trial. As I've said, I don't care how we're doing compared to other cities. I care how we're doing today compared to yesterday. But Saginaw is in the same boat with all of Michigan's cities. And if we're talking about the financial issues that put them in that boat, it's important for informed debate, intelligent discussion, and workable solutions to know how that boat got where it is. History geek that I am, I'm going to trace that boat back to 1893. That's when Michigan enacted the General Property Tax Act and established the way state and local governments would pay for their operations. There was and still is a 20 mil cap, and that's how the state funded its operations pretty much until the Depression. Local governments got a portion, but the system was set up in 1893 to help local governments pay for the 3 services the state said they had to provide: elections, property assessment, tax collections. By the way, these 3 services are still the only services state law says a local government must provide. Everything else, police, fire, streets, sewer, lighting, parks, they're all gravy. They're the things cities started providing as we shifted from a rural agrarian society to an urban industrial one, because those services are what made people come and want to live in your city. Starting in the 1930s, the state, nudged by the Depression, started to realize that property tax wasn't providing the revenue a growing state needed. So the state said, hey, cities, you can have it. We're going to go to a sales tax, then a liquor tax, then an income tax. And over the years, the state shared some of that new revenue with the cities too. In fact, at one point, 11.5% of the state's income taxes were going back to county and local governments, and as much as 15% of the sales tax. But there were years of enormous growth. These were years of enormous growth, and that growth in people and infrastructure was still outpacing what property taxes and revenue sharing could support. In the 1960s, the state allowed cities to impose an income tax, but restricted the rate they could charge. I'd like to say that the worst thing in the 70s that happened in the 70s were disco, Richard Nixon, and the hairstyles. But at least Nixon implemented a federal revenue sharing program for cities. And that helped steady the boat for a while. But white flight and exurban growth came in from one direction, and from the other direction came Howard Jarvis. He led a taxpayer revolt that, like so many bad ideas, started in California and rapidly infested the rest of the country. Here, it led to the passage of the Headley Amendment, a complicated package of reforms. The most significant one for us today was that it stuck a fork in the one good thing about the property tax system, that when your tax base grew, you'd receive more revenue to invest in your community services. Headley says your tax base grew, you need to lower the millage rate to balance it out with a little inflationary wiggle room. At about the same time as the Headley Amendment, the voters here in Saginaw passed what I sometimes call the Headless Amendment, in which we took it one step further. We capped the absolute dollar value of our general fund tax revenues at 1979's level, $3.8 million, with no adjustment for inflation. In 1987, the federal government eliminated its municipal revenue sharing program. In our case, that was a 10% hit on our general fund budget. At about the same time, the value of real estate started rising and rising and rising, and we were eventually led to believe that the law of supply and demand no longer applied to property. So while it was going up, property taxes were too. That made us get the reform itch again. The result in 1994 was Proposal A. This was designed primarily to change the way schools were funded, but it also planted a ticking time bomb that blew up when the real estate bubble collapsed. In 2008, as property values crashed, municipal and county governments saw their property tax and revenues fall by as much as 35%. Proposal A limits how much taxable value can increase each year to the rate of inflation, or 5%, whichever is less. So even if property values magically rose tomorrow to pre-recession levels, it would still take 15 to 20 years for the taxable value and the city's revenue to get back to that point. By way of comparison, the state of Michigan's revenues went from $47 billion in 2008 to $55 billion in 2011. They made it through the recession. In that same period, the revenue the state shared with local governments declined. In 2009, Saginaw received $10.3 million in state shared revenue. This year, $7 million. I go through this today not because I want to lay the blame for the problems of our cities or the problems of Saginaw on the state of Michigan. In fact, to give Governor Snyder and his administration a tremendous amount of credit, Michigan cities are at the table with the governor and his staff as they look at ways to fix our cities. And I don't think that's always been the case. My reason for pointing this out is so we all understand that Saginaw is not alone. And one of the most important steps we must take to make Saginaw a great city again, to make all our cities great again, is statewide reform in the way we fund municipal government. The mayors of Michigan's 14 urban core cities and the Michigan Municipal League are working very closely with the governor's urban affairs staff to make that happen. I think Brian Larkin from the State Urban Affairs staff had planned to be here. I don't know if he's here. Nope, don't see him. But we've been working very closely, have a great working relationship with them. While we're on history, there are a few things I might want to make note of because, once again, they're important if we want to see the whole picture. We're in a world today of such fast-paced information that we often get only a quick glance. And a quick glance might lead us to believe we're seeing one thing when, if we dig into the details, we're seeing something else. So how have those changes we just talked about affected Saginaw's budget? In 1977, just before the Headley and the Headless Amendments, property taxes made up just under a quarter of Saginaw's general fund revenues. Income tax was just under a third, state shared revenue was 18%, federal revenue sharing was only 7%. We can already see the effects the first year of Saginaw's tax cap. Property taxes have slipped to 16% of revenue, income tax remains at about a third, state revenue sharing has grown to almost a quarter, and federal revenue sharing 11%. Now let's look at today. Property taxes, remember this is the primary way to fund cities, the state said in 1893. It's only 11% of our revenue. Income tax is 39%, state shared revenue 22%, and federal revenue sharing, it's gone like a fastball to Cabrera. As we've looked over the years at hard choices we're making, people say the city is smaller, shouldn't the city government be smaller too? and it is. In 1980, the city of Saginaw had 77,000 residents. Today, it has 51,000, a loss of 37%. By the way, we still have the same mileage of roads, the same mileage of sewers, the same mileage of streets, streetlights. In 1980, we had 1,100 employees. Today, we have 439. That's almost twice the rate of decline, 61%. Where have those cuts been made? In that same 33-year time period, the city manager's office has gone from 8 FTEs to 2.8, the city clerk's office from 24 to 5, the city's legal department from 11 to 0, the human relations department from 8 to 0, or an overall general reduction in general government positions of 88%. Fiscal services has shrunk by 53%, development by 76%. Public safety in that same period has declined only by 47%. While we're talking about city staff, I'd like to acknowledge the many who are here today, and these are the people who are doing much more with less every day. Could you please stand, city staff? Phil, you got lost from the herd. I'd also like to introduce fellow council members, Mayor Pro Tem Dennis Browning, Councilman Norm Braddock, Councilman Andrew Wendt, Councilman Floyd Clock, Councilman Larry Caloris. Anybody else sneak in that I didn't see? Okay. As we've gotten smaller, we've still managed to accomplish a lot. So again, some perspective. Central Michigan University unveiled its designs for 2 buildings it's going to build in which it'll offer medical education in Saginaw very soon. Construction was started on a new home for Great Lakes Bay Michigan Works in downtown Saginaw. They'll join more than 200 AT&T employees who moved from the township into its downtown building. Just down the street, Catholic Federal Credit Union and Midwestern Surgical Associates invested in new facilities. DuParon Corporation, Fullerton Tool, Merrill Technologies Group, Rifkin Scrap Iron and Metal, Mystic Way Group, U.S. Graphite, Cygnus Corporation, Custom Foods, Gateway Financial, Hausbeck Pickle, and Midwest Manufacturing are just a few of the companies who made significant investments last year in equipment and facilities, creating and retaining jobs in the city of Saginaw. One of the biggest of those announcements came from General Motors, which invested $215 million to begin production of a new line at Saginaw Metal Castings operation. We continue to reap the benefits of the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which has helped us raise more than 500 blighted buildings, acquire, rehab, and sell more than 40 homes, and assist in the construction of the Bliss Park Senior Housing Project, the largest residential building investment in its neighborhood in close to a century. The Bancroft and Eddy buildings, truly the heart of our city, have been purchased by a developer with a great track record of success and will, as Mr. Hanley mentioned, be turned into retail and market rate housing. And I understand something's happening right across the street, but I won't steal Matt's thunder. The Saginaw's Promise program got a huge boost thanks to the generosity of thousands of donors, the biggest of them in more ways than one, a guy named Irvin Johnson, who threw in $20,000 of his own cash. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Lamar Woodley, who continues to make sure Saginaw's young people have things to do and real heroes to look up to. So as I've said up here 3 previous times, there are plenty of wonderful things going on here, things that are signs that Saginaw is still full of life, energy, and promise. But there is still much to do. We will continue to find every available resource to stabilize and eliminate vacant and blighted properties. Council is currently working on legislation that will give us new tools to help keep landlords honest and hold owners of foreclosed properties accountable. We've been working closely with the Environmental Protection Agency, looking at Saginaw as a possible pilot project in managing the downsizing of municipal services. And we're looking at creative staffing opportunities to increase our code enforcement activities. But the one area where we still have the most to do is in public safety and crime. What good news there was last year, that overall violent crime continued trending downward, is cold comfort against a 20-year high in homicides, including the senseless death of a 12-year-old boy. That's what makes the financially driven decisions we face over public safety staffing so agonizing and so critical. We've managed over the last 7 years to keep police and fire staffing fairly stable compared to other cities in the state. You'll recall that Flint laid off about a third of its police officers and firefighters in 2009 and just rehired them last fall after passing a special millage. After falling to fewer than 50 police officers to serve a city of 60,000, Pontiac finally pulled the plug and outsourced its police and fire departments. We dodged those bullets in 2006 when our residents passed a public safety millage that helped us keep 51 positions. We dodged them again in 2010 when that millage was renewed and increased. But revenues have continued to decrease and expenses continue to go up, which means we're at the same kind of decision point those other cities faced several years ago. How can we continue to provide high-quality police and fire services in the face of declining revenues? At this point, there are 3 options that you've probably heard about. Contracting police with the Saginaw County Sheriff's Department while making cuts in the fire department. Cutting both departments to 55 police officers and 35 firefighters. And the so-called mayor's plan, which isn't really a standalone plan to sustain public safety, but a way to increase law and code enforcement presence while addressing the revenue side of the deficit. Something that works only if we can achieve significant cost reductions in other areas. So contrary to the way it's been portrayed, it's not an A, B, or C decision. It may well be a mixture of elements of each, as well as other ideas that are still being explored. Any of the options will be controversial. Any will be difficult, and none of them will make everyone happy. But council will make the final decision knowing that its responsibility is to not only balance the budget, but to provide the best service, the most service it can. And that's critical if we're going to continue reducing our rate of violent crime. But we must also be aware that more police alone will not solve our crime problem. As my classmate noted, this city government, this county government, any government cannot, by itself, solve our crime problems. Government cannot ensure that every young child receives the nutrition, care, and nurturing he needs. Government cannot raise every child to ensure she has respect for herself, respect for others, a sense of right and wrong, and a thirst for knowledge. Government cannot make sure a child shows up for school with a full belly and an open mind. Government cannot make sure that every child grows up with a positive role model, values academic achievement, and becomes a responsible citizen. Government cannot eliminate the allure of the street or the no-snitch code that helps drive it. Only people can. We've got a lot of them in this room who are. You help when you join a neighborhood association or a service organization. You help when you support a Saginaw business, providing jobs and hope for people in Saginaw. You help when you volunteer, helping others, especially young people, find recreational opportunities, learn to read, learn to grow, learn to love. You help when you contribute to the scores of nonprofit organizations that provide services to help pull people up from economic challenges and through emotional ones. You help when you support the arts, which help us look beyond our streets, beyond our rooms, beyond ourselves, so we can see every perspective of what's possible. Yes, we need more police, but we also need more people doing those things. Because the more people we have doing those things that government spending can't do, the less government spending we need. I know the people in this room today are the people who are doing those things. On behalf of the City of Saginaw, I thank you for them, and I thank you for your continued support for and belief in the city I'm still proud to call home. Thank you.